afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful and very special presentation for Sleep Week and Sleep Equity. I want to just first start by saying we're going to have an introduction of our wonderful speaker by the Associate Director, of our center, Dr. TSCS. But before we do that, I want to let you guys know that during his introduction, there's going to be a couple of polls that pop up with questions about sleep that we want you to answer. And so there's going to be about 4 of them, and we don't want you to think too hard about them. Just take 30 seconds to answer each of the questions. And we're going to kind of incorporate that into our discussion at the end. So without further ado, Dr. TSCS will introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Thank you so much to my colleague, Dr. Turner. And I just want to welcome our entire community and family. For those of you near and far, my name is Aziz TSCS. I'm Associate Professor at the University of Miami. And I'm just so proud to welcome you as Associate Director of the Translational Sleep and Circadian Sciences program. On behalf of our team, we believe in the mantra of sleep well and be well. And there's no more fitting speaker today to talk about those issues than my very dear colleague, friend, mentor, Dr. Jourdan Jean-Louis. As many of you know or may not know, Dr. Jean-Louis is considered one of the pioneering leading thinkers in sleep and circadian sciences. He is professor of psychiatry and neurology at the current Miller School of Medicine. He's also the director of our newly formed program on translational sleep and circadian sciences, and longstanding director of the Pride Institute on Behavioral Medicine and Sleep Disorders Research. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Jean-Louis. He has a tremendous amount of experience, and in many ways, you know, if I were to list all of those, it would take the entire hour. So I'll just provide a few. He has served in several capacities and is considered as a thought leader by the National Institutes of Health, and that's evidenced by him serving on several sleep advisory boards for the Cancer, Heart, and Sleep Epidemiology Study section, and served in many capacities for the NIH. He is widely and extensively funded, both from the federal government as well as from industry and nonprofit organization. He has been prolific with over 400 publications, primarily in sleep and circadian sciences and cardiometabolic brain injury. And in some of the top journals, from New England Journal of Medicine to JAMA to Circulation. And this really only scratches the surface of his accomplishments. His overarching goal of research, which I'm sure many of you will hear about, his vision of our program, as well as his vision for sleep health overall and how to achieve sleep equity. And he does this by really tackling some core research areas. One is, how do we address multi-level barriers in hindering adoption of healthful practices in minoritized communities? His research focuses on the application of agile digital health models to enhance treatment adherence to reduce risk of cardiovascular disease and brain injury. His research also addresses psychosocial and environmental determinants of health behavior, preventing access to adequate care in diverse communities, and particularly those that are disproportionately burdened by adverse cardiovascular disease and cerebrovascular outcomes like stroke. His current research addresses mechanisms of sleep deficiency and its association with biomarkers in terms of cardiovascular disease and inflammation and brain injury, and trying to fundamentally understand what are the structural infrastructures that drive health inequity, particularly sleep health inequity. And lastly, for all of what he has done. Dr. Jean-Louis was recently acknowledged as a pioneer in minority health and health disparities, was selected as one of the most inspiring Black scientists in America, and most recently, he received the Sleep Research Society's Mary A. Carskadon Outstanding Educator Award. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome our fearless director and leader, Dr. Jourdan Jean-Louis. Welcome, Dr. Jean-Louis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seshas, as well as Dr. Turner. I hope that my screen is sharing properly. So can you guys see this okay?
Dr. Jean-Louis, it's sharing your notes, so maybe go on presenter view.
Better?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Technology, I'm still learning how to maneuver around. So what I'd like to do today is to spend a bit of time talking about what we view as a critical factor in terms of healthcare in America and across the world. Health disparities have been with us for a number of years. And what we'd like to do is to spend some time talking about, in particular, what we regard as a critical aspect of our being at the University of Miami, looking at sleep and circadian health disparity. Again, once again, Dr. Seshas, this is a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. I have nothing to declare in terms of a conflict of interest. So we want to spend some time talking about the importance of sleep, what happens if you're not sleeping enough. We'll talk about sleep and circadian health disparities. We'll talk about different ways to recognize and to treat sleep disorders. We'll talk about what's happening to post-sleep and minoritized communities. Then we'll talk about the interventions we have engaged in for the last 10, 15 years in terms of reducing health disparities and improving health equity as a whole. So you ask, why do we sleep? Well, there isn't a very satisfactory answer to this, but we do know about some of the purposes of sleep, and they are before you. So all of you know, if you're not having a good night's sleep, the next day you're gonna wake up a little bit groggy, not being able to function, sometimes you're irritable. But there's very strong evidence that sleep, in fact, is good for memory consolidation. And more recently, in terms of Alzheimer's dementia, we know if you're not having enough delta sleep, the lymphatic system doesn't work adequately. Therefore, some of the toxins in your brain are not flushed out. Therefore, you are likely to have Alzheimer's dementia, especially if you happen to be minority men and women. Well, all species that have been studied so far do in fact sleep, from the wombats about 20 hours to the cows, about 3 hours or so. But humans, and we say that we should be sleeping about 8 hours. We'll see a little later whether or not this is true. The bottom line is that we're not the only species that sleep. All kinds of species do in fact sleep. Well, we sleep in different type of positions. Similarly, we find in animal kingdom, all the species also sleep during the night in different positions. We also know that there are animals, for instance, dolphins and birds, migratory birds, as they fly, they manage to keep half of their brain awake so they could engage in those activities, and the other half also is sleeping. Even among invertebrates, the hydra, for instance, also displays activity that looks like sleeping behavior. A lot of you might think that this is what a sleep lab looks like. Well, not so much. It's really something like this. So you're outfitted, you sleep in an environment that's comfortable, that's conducive to sleep. And indeed, a lot of people think that if you were to go to the lab, you're not going to be able to sleep. That's just not the case. In fact, you are completely outfitted, and in a few minutes, you should be able to fall asleep okay. That's what a sleep lab really looks like. So what do we do, in fact, when we're looking at the EEG parameters? If you see all the lectures on the person's head, these are the parameters we are looking at. Mostly EEG of the type that we are interested in would be what we call alpha, theta, and delta sleep. So if you happen to be somebody who meditated a lot, you'll see that you produce a lot of alpha waves. But essentially, in terms of what we're looking at here, with regards to Alzheimer's dementia, we are specifically concerned about the level of delta sleep that African Americans are exposed to. And eventually, there are ways we can differentiate different types of sleep. We could talk about stage 1 sleep, stage 2, 3, 4 combined as delta sleep, and eventually REM sleep. So how do we recognize the difference among the 4? Well, in non-REM sleep, stage 1, it's really transition sleep. If I call your name as you fall asleep, you should be able to respond. And you gradually get into stage 2, takes about 20 minutes. You get into the delta sleep of stage 3, when you're completely relaxed, and that's when you are, in fact, releasing some of the toxins from your brain. And eventually you get into the REM sleep, you're not disturbed when you actually are dreaming. When you are dreaming, you're not gonna be able to move around. In fact, if you were to move around, you would have what we call REM behavior disorder, which can be diagnosed and treated. That's what in a nutshell happens on a nightly basis, believe it or not. Some of you may not remember your dream, but do know every single night, we dream about 4 to 5 times if in fact you are not disturbed. So notice we go from one cycle to the next. So every night or so, we go through a period of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, followed by REM sleep. Well, here's what we look at, what sleep looks like rather, in terms of the lifespan development. So you would see as a baby, as a newborn baby, you sleep quite a bit, 16 hours or so. And as we begin to get a little older, sleep begins to diminish over time until such time you might be able to get about 5 to 6 hours of sleep if you happen to be 70 or 80 years of age. According to the National Sleep Foundation, if you happen to be an adult, you should be sleeping about 7 to 9 hours. I will show you a little later that it's really about 7 to 8, but that's the recommendation from the National Sleep Foundation. And NIH itself would recommend 7 to 8 hours, which I tend to be in agreement with. So here in South Florida, if you look at this map from the CDC, you would note that how many of us, in fact, are not sleeping enough. So this is really sleeping less than 7 hours, which is considered to be short sleep. So notice that if you happen to be in South Florida, about 32 to 36% of us are not getting adequate sleep. Now, we talked about the recommendation being about 7 to 9 hours. In fact, if you look at data that was collected in San Diego in 2002, it's more of a curvilinear relationship in terms of how many people might actually die within 6 years and the amount of sleep they get. So notice that the best longevity would be achieved at the 7-hour mark rather than 9 hours. So really, that's why I said earlier, I subscribe to the NIH recommendation, which says you really should be sleeping 7 to 8 hours. But I, for instance, most of the time, I get about 6.5 to 7 hours, and 7 hours really is the sweet spot. That study has been replicated multiple times in different countries, different continents, again, showing that 7 hours seems to be the best hour or optimal hour if you wanted to increase longevity and keep your comorbidities to a minimum. Now, there are consequences to short sleep and long sleep, as you can see before your eyes here on the top portion of the slide. You would realize if you happen to be a short or long sleeper, your risk of having blood pressure is substantially higher. Your cholesterol level tends to be higher, as well as inflammation. And of course, if you're looking at some of the endpoints, such as all-cause mortality, notice we have a curvilinear relationship. For all of those 4 different graphs, notice that 7 hours seems to be the best here in terms of what you should obtain. So therefore, if you happen to be having difficulty sleeping 8 to 9 hours or so, do know that there's AP data that demonstrates if you were to be sleeping 7 hours, you should be okay. Now, if you're very concerned about that, I certainly recommend you go talk to a sleep clinician who should be able to advise you in terms of how you're doing, how well you are doing. These are some of the consequences of sleep deprivation in our society. As you can see, if you're not sleeping well, cognitively, you're going to become impaired. Your immune function will be to some degree impaired. And that's a particular concern among African Americans that are sleeping enough. So you might have heard that if you're not sleeping enough, even if you were to be vaccinated, the vaccine themselves do not have the type of effect you would want to see. Appetite tends to be compromised. You may have heard about leptin and ghrelin. Those 2 hormones control appetite and metabolism. If they become desynchronized, you tend to gain weight. And even if you were to be exercising, you're not as likely to lose the weight as you would. Of course, mood is a problem, heart health is impaired, and to some degree, poor sleep also predicts cancer risk. Well, if you're sleepy, you fall asleep wherever you happen to be. So in this case, this person was having a party and then she fell asleep. Well, the same thing can happen, of course, if you happen to be significantly sleep deprived. So if you happen to see somebody who's sleepy, sometimes somebody say they are lazy, they are malingering, not necessarily. Unless you know something about who they really are, do not accuse them of being lazy or malingering. It could simply be that they are very sleepy. Sleepiness causes a lot of accidents. You may have heard about this. Chernobyl was one of them. The Challenger disaster, Exxon Valdez, all of those have one thing in common, that the operators, in fact, were very sleepy after they were interrogated. Also, you might have known about all of those. If you happen to be driving in New York City, for instance, during the snow, you really want to have some sense about how sleepy those people are, because if they are very sleepy, the likelihood of engaging in a car accident is substantially higher. Now, just to show you that there's a circadian rhythms or about 24-hour rhythm in terms of level of sleepiness. So naturally, during the night, your alertness is significantly lower as you begin to wake up in the morning. You go throughout the afternoon or so, your alertness should be a little bit much higher. But also notice that sometime between 12 and 3 p.m., you tend to be very sleepy. So naturally, if you want to take a nap at that time, that's probably encouraged, but you might want to be careful if you're taking a nap at the office. This is usually frowned upon, even though most people would take a nap in the afternoon, 10, 15 minutes or so. They report much better productivity after the wake out of the nap episode. So what we know is there are periods during which you are very sleepy. These are the periods we encourage people not to drive. For instance, early morning hours, most accidents tend to occur. Therefore, we encourage you very strongly, if you're going to be driving, find a way to get some sleep in early morning hours, and do pause sometime in the afternoon and take a break, because these are the time when we are most prone to having car accidents and to commit all kinds of errors if you're operating heavy machinery. This slide might shock you a little bit. It's only here to demonstrate that if you happen to be very sleepy, it's about the equivalent of being drunk. So if you say to yourself, would I be driving if I were drunk? The answer, of course, is you should not. Similarly, if you are to be very sleepy, you really should not be driving, because the consequences of both of them would be likelihood of engaging in car accidents or hurting yourself and harming others. So therefore, we say if you not having enough sleep, you're likely to be to some degree irritable, having difficulty focusing, your memory can be affected, you are likely to put on some weight, and certainly you don't want to be driving if you are falling asleep. There are multiple reasons why people experience insufficient sleep. Some of them could be a medical problem, such as obstructive sleep apnea. If you happen to be insomnia, you can't fall asleep fast enough, or you wake up too many times during the night. If you happen to be snoring, it's a critical factor here. If you're snoring, most of the time it suggests what we call obstructive sleep apnea. If you're snoring, do in fact speak to a physician so that they can help you diagnose this if in fact you should be treated for OSA. Lots of environmental factors, in fact, are associated with insufficient sleep. This is the type of work we're doing right now in South Florida. Sleep deprivation affects cognition, and that's the work that Dr. Turner is doing, as well as performance. If you happen to be a resident, you should be very careful about driving early morning hours because of lack of sleep. And as we said earlier, if you happen to be sleepy for a period of 24 hours, it's the same as if you're illegally drunk. Therefore, be very careful about that. We do not want folks to get involved in an accident, especially after this conversation today. My own contribution, I'll talk about some of the work I did in San Diego in terms of actigraphic sleep algorithms. We'll talk about some of the work in terms of sleep duration and light exposure. We'll see a bit about what we've been doing since we returned to New York in terms of the burden of sleep disorders in African-American or Black communities. We'll also talk about some of the mechanism of disparities in sleep disorders that we have been engaging in the last 5 years. And lastly, we talk about our work in terms of circadian rhythms among folks with brain injury, as well as cardiovascular disease profile. My story began at City College a long time ago, where I, in fact, volunteered in a particular study. You might notice me here in front of a polygraph machine. That was about 25 years ago. We don't use those anymore. We just use a computer that does the job. So in fact, I give credit to David Rappaport, as well as Art Spillman as my mentors. And you could see on the right side, I'm becoming a bit more mature, but my hair was nice and well. I had a mustache there. I was in fact operating the machine we call polygraph machine. I had also met Modi Dillian at NYU that actually taught me everything I needed to know about neuropsychology and the brain. And thereafter, I went to San Diego, where I worked with Dan Kripke. That's a fellow wearing that interesting sombrero hat. This is where I began to do some of the work in terms of actigraphic algorithm. Now, this work was critically important because we wanted to look at sleep in populations that don't usually go to the sleep lab, such as older people, as well as Blacks and Hispanic. So the actigraph now is considered to be valid, but not so much work has been done in terms of the new wearables for which the rigor of assessing their reliability has not been the same. So we have a lot more work to do in terms of some of the new wearables or neurables. Back in San Diego, we began to observe that there were differences between Black and white. Now, we didn't talk about disparities necessarily. We were just thinking about where sleep duration seems to be lower among Blacks, quality seems to be lower. We weren't really sure why. So when I left San Diego and I went to SUNY Downstate, I looked at some more data in terms of what was happening between Black and white. Here's data we have here, looking at NHIS and ENHANCE, both of which have shown that over time, there's a discrepancy between the amount of sleep that Black would enjoy versus what white would enjoy. And it seems as if over time, the discrepancy between the two is getting wider and wider. The same phenomenon, of course, is true for NHANES. So which means over time, the problem in terms of Blacks not having enough sleep has remained prevalent, and something has to be done about this. One of the consequences of increased short sleep is obesity. We're not saying necessarily that one causes the other, but we have seen over time that as the percentage of slump sleepers goes up, the number of people with overweight and obesity has also gone up. We also know that even within ethnic groups, there are differences. So here we have some data that shows, if you're looking at how Blacks are doing, Mexican American and other Hispanics with reference to white, notice that the percent of short sleepers is substantially higher compared with white men and women. Work we did some time ago in Brooklyn, New York has also shown, even within some of the ethnic groups, that there are differences. We can't really talk necessarily about disparities. Here we can only say that there are differences that cannot be ignored. Therefore, if you're looking at Blacks and white, you must look at the sub-ethnic groups as well, because they don't necessarily behave the same way. So I also done some work in terms of light and circadian rhythms. We're not going to talk a whole lot about this, but just so that you know that the master clock, which we call the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is controlled by light. Therefore, you want to have adequate exposure to light dark cycle, because if you do, the strength of your circadian rhythm is acceptable versus a population where you have very low level light during the day and lots of light during the night. I'll give you some example in a little bit. So here's what we have in terms of San Diego data. Here we're looking at sleep duration on the left quadrant. What we see is that Black compares with Asian, Hispanic, and white men and women happen to be enjoying much less sleep. He's about 30 minutes per night looking at the actigraphic data. Similarly, if you're looking at the light exposure levels, you would also see that Blacks have much lower light compared to Asian, Hispanic, and white population also. So in terms of both sleep and light, Blacks are having much lower levels, which in fact does have consequences. If you're also looking at light as a function of a sex or gender, if you will, if you're looking at age factors, notice that men happen to be exposed to much higher level of light. And if you happen to have lower BMI, you tend to be exposed to much lower light, which is something to think about. Here is what we see in terms of figure 2, looking at the association between light and sleep, which only shows that if the more light you're exposed to, the more likely to have increased sleep time. So work we did after we left San Diego, went to SUNY Downstate, also demonstrated that light levels between Blacks and white, as you can see on this graph here, is also significantly lower. But also here, we have data that shows that the level of melatonin that Blacks and whites secrete on a nightly basis, as indicated by AMT6-mesol, is also significantly different. Also of interest to us in terms of circadian dysregulation is the fact that the phase of light exposure, as well as the phase of melatonin secretion, is significantly earlier compared to white, which also has significant consequences. We also see here that even if you were to have adequate level of light, as you can see from the second table, or table at the bottom, that Black folks also have significant eye dysfunctions that make it even more difficult for them to secrete melatonin, which is regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So here I wanted to spend some time just to show those data. You may have seen data that just came out from Phyllis' lab that shows even low level of lights, such as a desk sleep at night, can in fact compromise insulin levels. So what do we see here on the left graph? What we see is that Black folks have lower light during the day and higher light during the night. That's the opposite of what you want to see. You want to see as much light as possible during the day and almost no light during the night, which suggests to me that if you see insulin dysregulation among Blacks, it may be a function of too much light being exposed during the nocturnal period. It's something that we are now looking at from some of the projects we have here, Dornil, Essential, and Mosaic. More to come. Here, I just wanted to point out to you something very interesting. We look at that data that was collected about 18 years ago, which shows that the photo period of Blacks and white are substantially different. Why is that important? Whenever you have dysregulation of your photo period, which should be about 24 hours, if it happens to be less, you may have metabolic dysregulation. You could also have some type of brain injury, which are indicated by A-beta and tau, which we'll come back to. Here, what we see is that this phenomenon has not been verified or has not been studied further. The lab we are building right now will give us the platform to address it. Why is it that African-American have much lower photo period compared to white? We don't have an answer yet. Hopefully in a couple of years, we'll be able to explain that further. So then all of you may know that there are disparities in the medical care. We know about this. There are disparities in terms of high blood pressure, diabetes, HIV, and cancer. What we've been asking for the last 15 years is, do we have disparities in sleep medicine? Do we have disparities in terms of short sleep, disparities in terms of OSA, insomnia, narcolepsy, and the like? I'm happy to report that over time, there has been a significant interest in terms of focusing on sleep in minoritized communities. And somebody said to me, well, much of that has to do with the kind of work that your group has been doing, and I'll take the credit for it. Thank you very much. About 8 years ago, NIH convened a meeting bringing in all kinds of experts to talk about sleep disparities, to talk about what we have to do in terms of reducing the disparities to reach that coveted mark of health equity across America. That's the title of our presentation today. So we had this special issue published in Sleep Medicine. All you want to know about sleep medicine in terms of disparities can be found in that particular special issue. And right now we're planning a book based upon the kind of work we have done so far and the work that some of our friends have been engaged in terms of sleep health disparities. The work that we do here at TSCS, Translational Sleep and Circadian Sciences, much of that is informed by this adage or passage rather from Martin Luther King that said essentially, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And to that we agree. And that's the motive of all of the work we're doing right now, is to reduce disparities in health and circadian rhythms and improve health equity in South Florida. Hopefully this model can be replicated in other states in America. And I also would point out some of the work that David Williams has been doing. In fact, he said, what we need to do is find out where the factors that underlie disparities and do something about dismantling them. And that's what we've been doing in terms of different sources of disparities and how do we dismantle them to achieve health equity. Here, I just wanted to indicate to you that if you are looking at differences between Black and white, you are going to find them. The question is, do we have disparities? And how do we define disparities? This is very important. So when you're thinking about disparity, what you're thinking about is, are there systemic issues or policies or guidelines that make it more difficult for Black and brown folks to reach to have a certain level of care that other communities, such as white communities, do have, to the degree that there may be discrimination, any type of biases, stereotype, organization of care, to the degree that those underlie those differences, now we have a disparity that must be dismantled at once. So I'll point out to you that there are 3 levels of disparities. One is referred to as patient level. We're not going to get into some of the details. Healthcare system levels, as well as provider levels. With regards to the very first one, patient level, our work has been over the last 8 years primarily focused on that. And we're now moving away a little bit to looking at the healthcare as well as the provider level disparities. If you want to engage in health disparities work, broadly speaking, there are models that are published you could refer to. He's the one that we have used ourselves as we were beginning to build the whole health disparities paradigm we've been using for the last 15 years. Again, we're not going to go over this, but just to tell you that such models do exist. It's not something that we just came up ourselves. We are following models that other fields have used in the past. So what we have done is systematically is we've gone through the process that has been recommended. So what we did the very first time we wanted to have disparity research is to engage folks in the community, CBOs. Anybody who has influential in Brooklyn, New York, we invited them to participate in our survey where we're trying to find out what are some of those factors that are important to your communities and how do we go about solving them? Based upon that, we put together a shared sleep research agenda, which about a year later, we had the NYU Sleep Summit, where we wanted to talk about particular solutions to address those disparities. And so essentially what we have done is we have gone from having no idea really what to do in the community, no awareness, and we've gone to the point we have engaged and we're now doing some advocacy work. So you ask why sleep apnea? Well, we decided to focus on sleep apnea because the Delphi survey suggested that sleep apnea was a significant problem for them that had to be addressed. So sleep apnea is connected to almost everything you could possibly think of, whether it be psychological health, whether it be medical health, and the like. So what we have done is to get a much better sense of what's happening in the community, we've done a lot of surveys, mixed methods. So we engaged a number of Black folks in Brooklyn. We were asking them, what do they know about sleep apnea? That's essentially what some of the results are showing here, that a lot of them had no idea what OSA was, what a sleep center does, or where a sleep center was located. And I think the most important factor here was the fact that after we have engaged them, they said, if I knew how to get evaluated and if the evaluation would translate into better healthcare, I would consider that. We actually use that to make the case to the NIH that they should give us funding to further explore that, which we got. So the very first study in terms of intervention we did is what we call MEDSO. So essentially, before we talk about MEDSO, let me say a bit more about this. These are some of the barriers we have observed. Again, notice that we had some ideas what the problems were, but until such time we engaged them directly, we did not really know what the barriers are. So before you do any type of intervention, the very first step is to establish what the barriers are and the facilities of care. So here we have some of the barriers in terms of personal level disparities. And the key factor here is that most of those Black folks we have engaged had very low level of self-efficacy. Therefore, all of our interventions were aimed at one thing. Can we improve self-efficacy? Because if we did, we knew for a fact we should be able to engage, actually, at least encourage them to engage in the type of behavior, such as screening for OSA. And if they were positive, wear the CPAP mask to ensure that we have ways of reducing cardiovascular disease risk. Here is an example of what self-efficacy is. I'm sure that most of you know that already. With regards to the other levels of disparities, such as the primary care, as well as the provider level, we also have a number of disparities that have to be addressed. And here are some of them. So most of the time, doctors felt they didn't have enough time to screen patients. And if they were to be screened, where do we refer them? There are really no mechanism in place to make it easier for providers to, in fact, triage patients, refer them, and get a report and be able to provide the kind of care that they really need. This just to show you that in regards to what we are doing in our lab, we look at all the attributes that are that make it possible for us to understand what's happening in the community, as well as coming up with models that are population-based. All the personal attributes we're looking at, the stressors, community assets, as well as some of the moderating factors that make it almost impossible to improve health equity. But I think so far we're doing a very good job in terms of understanding what those factors are and how to address them. Community engagement is really what we do best. Now, we are building a lab, we've done some laboratory work, but the last 15 years, our effort has been about community engagement to make sure that the people who need the most get, in fact, the information they have to make adequate decisions in terms of their sleep health care. There are different levels of community engagement. A lot of people focus on transactional, which is good, but not as good as it should be. Transitional gets you a little bit closer, but ultimately, what our group adheres to is transformational community engagement. By that we mean It's a process whereby the community stakeholders, as well as the academicians ourselves, we come together even before a project gets submitted to the NIH. In that way, we have a two-way relationship whereby the academics enjoy the process, benefit from it, and the community health champions also enjoy the process as well as benefit from it. That's the only way you could ensure sustainability. You're often asked, after the project is done 5 years later, what do you do? If there's no sustainability, you really haven't done a very good job. And if you adhere to the third level of engagement, you are almost guaranteed to have sustainability of all of the gains you have had for the 5-year project. That's what we do, folks. Our work is not in the lab necessarily. It's not at UM. It is really in the community. We go to the barbershops, we go to the beauty salon, the churches. That's where we screen. That's where we talk about sleep health, circadian health, and we get to entertain all kinds of questions about sleep. And I have to tell you, most of the satisfaction we get from what we do is in the community itself. That's why you catch us at the barbershop, the beauty salons, and on Sunday, we're going to be at Emmanuel Baptist Church to screen and to talk about sleep health. That's the attitude sometimes we see in the barbershop. So what do we get in terms of screening from the barbershop or the beauty salons, the churches? Essentially, if you're looking at data from the National Sleep Foundation, the level of OSA risk, it's about 28%. If you're looking at what's happening in terms of the community itself, it's about 43%. And if you're looking at clinics where people actually go to take care of their high blood pressure, diabetes, and the like, the level of OSA risk is about 59%, which means we have a whole lot of work to do, folks. Yeah, I just wanted to point out to you what we are talking about earlier. If you remember, and then at the national level, the level of insufficient sleep is about 23, maybe 30%. In that community in Brooklyn, it's about 71%. A lot of people are not getting the type of sleep they want. If you're looking at the level of risk, it's 49%. If you're looking at how many people will get a diagnosis, if you happen to be at risk and we monitor you at home, 87 of those people will actually get a diagnosis. Once again, what is that telling us? A lot of Black folks at the community level do in fact have sleep apnea, but they're not being diagnosed, let alone treated. We could skip this only to show you that here, that Black folks have much higher prevalence of OSA compared to white and Asians. The first intervention, again, we did stem from this particular data set. What we have here is the number of people that were referred to a particular clinic and how many people actually adhere to the doctor's recommendation to get a sleep test done. And of those people that actually agreed to get a sleep test done, here we have 91% of those people receive a diagnosis in the lab. This is crazy stuff, folks. It simply means if a doctor were to refer you for OSA exam at the laboratory, you are likely to get a diagnosis. Again, it tells us the work that we are doing is grounded in these principles that we have to go to the community, engage those people, and convince them that they really have to be screened, and if positive, they have to be treated with CPAP therapy. So the first trial called METSO, which was concluded and published, essentially, I just wanted to show you how successful it was. Here we use the trans-theoretical model to try and engage and walk people through the process. That's a whole system we call the navigation system. We are the first to have done this. And here we have demonstrated that if you were to use a motivational enhancement technique using materials that were tailored particularly for Black folks, you can in fact encourage them to adhere to treatment. Here we just wanted to point out to you that if you compare what we did versus control, 5 people that were part of the intervention, which means that were navigated through the process, were 5 times more likely to go get a screening test done, as well as adhere to recommended treatment for OSA. Based upon the result of that study, we had a long debriefing process where some of the volunteers indicated, gee, you know, that's nice you guys did navigation, you convinced me to come to the hospital. I would have preferred to have a sleep test done at home. Or how about creating a portal where we can actually get the information online at our own leisure? Well, we heard their voice, and it's what we did. We applied to the NIH, we got funding to do those. The first one is what we call the PZ study, which I'll talk about in a minute, and also the education portal, which we call TASH. PZ was almost the same thing as METSO, except that we didn't have a navigator station at the hospital. We actually had health educators, which we trained themselves. In fact, I shouldn't say we, Aziz actually trained those guys. From that, we actually put together what we call a PZ manual, which is now available. Anybody can actually utilize to train community health workers interested in sleep and circadian health. This model has yet to be published, but if anybody's interested, we can certainly share that with them. Here's the group that we trained, altogether 15 health educators. Everybody was certified. And in fact, one of the outcome of this is when COVID happened, it turned out these other guys actually we were utilizing their channel of communication to convey important information about COVID-19. What is it? What do we do about it? Should we get screened? Should we get tested? Should we take the vaccine? All of those guys that we had trained to become sleep health community health workers, in fact, became health champions that are providing adequate and trusted information about COVID-19. So community work is extremely important. With regards to PZ, what we had expected to see is that if you expose them to the health education that's tailored about sleep and circadian health, we'd have a significant difference in terms of who adheres to treatment. It turns out in this particular case, the level of emotional or social support they have received from the health educator seems to be the driving factor, as well as how much they know about sleep apnea and how much they may have dysfunctional beliefs about OSA. So this was a surprising result, but not so surprising, because in such communities, we have learned a while ago that those who have social support tend to do much better. So what do we know? If you engage in this type of work, you have to pay attention to the level of support that people get. Otherwise, this may compromise your ability to show that the intervention itself had a significant influence on the outcome. With regards to TASH, it's a portal that's not currently available. It provides health education to Black and brown folks in a way that relates directly to them, because all of the vignettes we have about sleep health education, what is sleep apnea? How do you treat that? What happened in the clinic? How do you engage providers who know about sleep apnea? What about CPAP? When do I get CPAP? How do I use CPAP? If they have trouble with CPAP, where do I go to? That particular portal provides the information in a way that Black folks can actually relate to, because it showcases folks that have OSA describing their own OSA journey. So again, the point here was that we had found that for Black with OSA, the level of health literacy was significantly higher. We wanted to be able to demonstrate that if you expose them to that type of information, their health literacy should significantly improve. And indeed, here I just wanted to point out that this was a process whereby the investigative team, us, engaged with community advisory board members or community steering committee members, as well as healthcare providers, folks who know about sleep, to design the intervention, to implement, build a website, expose folks to it, and to be able to demonstrate it was effective. I give credit to all of the community advisory board members or community steering committee members, without whom this project would have been impossible. Also give credit to the providers who participated. But here I just want to show you what it looks like. So when you go to TASH, these are the screenshots of what the portal looks like. Again, it depicts information or content, both visual and word, that are designed primarily because of what we had heard from them that would be important in terms of motivating them to go to the process of sleep care. That study, just want to point out here, was successful. It's published about 3 years ago. We demonstrated that if you expose folks to information tailored to their needs, we can in fact encourage them to go through the process of being screened as well as being treated. We have completed several studies looking at community engagement processes. Here, I just wanted to show you that we have a whole lot more studies being done, and a couple of them are pending funding at the NIH. Let's just talk about a couple of them very quickly. So the projects we're doing right now, besides the intervention, is to be able to have some understanding with regards to how the environment impacts sleep, as well as how psychosocial factors impact sleep. This is critically important. And in fact, it's not something that we decided to do. It's something that the community members told us that are important. What are we looking at? How does air pollution influence sleep? How does noise level influence sleep? So what do you know about noise level, for instance? In some of those communities, they're exposed to large amount of noise. Why is that important? Noise triggers high blood pressure. Noise prevents Black folks from getting into delta sleep, which is critically important. Also, psychosocial factors are very important. We are also looking at all those parameters among young Blacks, older Blacks, as well as Hispanic or Latinx communities, which will allow us to build models in terms of what we can do to reduce sleep deficiency, as well as promoting sleep health so that they now can reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease as well as brain injury. Here is what we are doing. We're actually looking at all those parameters in all of the studies we have. We're looking at sleep, we're looking at activity, we're looking at daily logs in terms of what they do on a daily basis, we're looking at noise level, we're looking at temperature fluctuation, air quality, and the like. And all of that, as I said earlier, is to build models that help us to understand what do we have to do, where do we intervene so that we could improve sleep health at the community level. Now, some of those projects started before COVID-19, and in fact, some of the devices we now have were not initially conceived to collect data in the community level. So COVID has given us the impetus to rethink and reimagine how we collect data for Black folks. And to that, I give all the credit to our friend Aziz Seshas that has completely revolutionized how we collect sleep and circadian health data. So what we're doing now, in fact, is instead of convincing people to come to the laboratory, what we're doing is we're dispatching those boxes to their home to collect cardiovascular disease markers, brain injury biomarkers, as well as sleep, noise, light, air quality, and the like. This is phenomenal stuff. I'm sure that there are other labs that are thinking about that, but the way we have done this is really cutting edge stuff. So I invite everybody to think about the way we're doing things here and join forces with it, because we believe that's a revolution. Things are going to change substantially in terms of how we access those communities and what kind of service you can provide to them. This to give you an impression of what the projects are about. This is just one of them. We have 3 projects like this. What we are doing is we're looking at the interplay between the environment and psychosocial factors and how those can influence sleep deficiency. We're talking about poor sleep, insomnia, as well as obstructive sleep apnea, which in turn may compromise brain injury, as well as neurocognitive functioning. But of course, through all of that, we have to look at all the vascular and inflammatory markers, as well as the demographic characteristics. In this particular project, I hope to be able to show is how do all those factors interact in terms of dysregulating circadian profile, as well as sleep profile, in a way that might lead to Alzheimer's dementia via dysregulation of A beta and tau. One of the projects that's now been considered for funding, hopefully be funded soon, is to be able to look at messages that are created just for Black and brown folks and to see, can we navigate them, not through the typical navigator or the PF educator, but have a system that's completely digitized so that they can actually control this themselves. Another one is to make it much easier for providers to, in fact, triage patients, refer them, and manage them in the event that they have sleep apnea or insomnia. That's the context within which we are operating. We have, as we talk about the research processes today, we didn't say a whole lot about training, but I show a few slides just to make the point that training is important in terms of what we are doing. This is a group of minority scientists we have trained. We're very happy about this. Our program Pride is also being implicated in Nigeria, Ghana, also being implemented in Haiti, as well as Jamaica. And he is a group of our friends that were featured about 2 years ago when we were still at NYU. And as I mentioned that before, because of all the work we have done in terms of training in Pride and other programs, we awarded the Mary Cascadian Award last year. We're very happy and proud about that. And lastly, just to point out that we mentioned that before, the lab is not yet fully established, but that's what we're planning to do. We mentioned that before. What are some of the mechanisms of disparities in the circadian clock itself that might make it more difficult for Black to regulate their metabolism, as well as prevent injury of the Alzheimer's type or cardiovascular disease injury? All in all, we really want to be able to understand if there is circadian misalignment, how do we fix this so that we don't have any downstream effects of cardiovascular disease and brain injury? So in our lab also, in our center rather, we have another lab that's being led back to Aziz Seshas. Everything we're doing in terms of digital implementation, in terms of digital training, that's all Aziz Seshas. One day you're going to be able to hear from them and see more about his lab. We also want to point out Dr. Judith Blanc also is building a lab herself, Holistic Families Lab. She'll tell you more about this. All of those is phenomenal work. we should talk more about this sometime in the future. Also want to point out that Dr. Turner, our third faculty member, junior faculty member, is a specialist and well-recognized for the work she does in terms of cognition and sleep, particularly among folks that are mild cognitive impairment or of the Alzheimer's type. This work is impossible without our team. That's not the full team. Just wanted to give credit to the team here assembled at UM. We also have another team in New York. One day we'll have a group picture coming soon. We'll skip those steps. Sleep well, be well. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Jean-Louis. So we're going to do a little bit of a question and answer session now. We got some questions. So I'm just going to read the questions out loud, Dr. Jean-Louis, and you can go ahead and answer them, okay?
Do I stop sharing?
If you'd like, it doesn't matter.
Okay,
I'm not going to share anything.
Got it.
So the first question is, if my 18-year-old son snores so loudly that you can hear them across an apartment, is that a sign of a serious issue? Should they participate in a sleep study?
This is absolutely an important question and one that has to be addressed. We know that anybody who snores, kids, adults, adolescents, older people, you have to take it very seriously. Snoring doesn't always mean you have difficulty breathing, therefore you're gonna have OSA. Some people snore for a number of reasons, but what we see is that about 75% to 80% of people who snore eventually get a diagnosis if they were to be assessed in a laboratory or at home. Yes, in this case, if a kid snores, a number of things might be wrong. Usually the adenoids that are too large can cause that. If the tongue is too large, can cause that. And also the tonsil can also be a question that have to be addressed. In all of those cases, you really want to talk to the pediatrician about this. Let them know that your kid snores, and they will want to do an evaluation to determine the cause of the snoring. That does not mean they have sleep apnea, but sometimes they do. If they happen to be overweight or obese, such that the upper airway, the throat area is occluded or obstructed, partially or completely, this could be a reason to do a sleep test. And then if positive, they have to be treated with CPAP therapy.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is, in what stage of sleep does sleepwalking occur?
In what?
In what stage of sleep does sleepwalking occur?
Mostly during slow wave sleep. Now, when that happens, of course, they are out of this particular phase and they are engaged in activities that they're not aware of. So the key factor is that if a person happens to be sleepwalking, kids or adults, what you really want to do is hold their hand gently and guide them back to the bed. Don't try to wake them up. They're not going to wake up. In fact, some of them can become even violent. If you happen to see somebody who's sleepwalking, gently grab their hands and walk them back to the bed and ask them to lay down. And if you were to talk to them the next day, guess what? They say, oh, me, I didn't do that. So they're not aware what's happening. So just be very careful. Don't try to wake them up. That's the key.
Awesome. Next question. What happens to your body when you oversleep for more than 9 hours?
What happened to?
Your body when you oversleep for more than 9 hours.
Well, if something happens to your body, it's completely restored. It's really a function of how you feel about what has transpired. If you actually need 9 hours, you are refreshed, life is fantastic, life is great. But if routinely you get 7 to 8 hours and you stay in bed for 9 hours, when you're trying to get out, you feel groggy, you can't focus because you've gone beyond what the body needs in terms of its own physiology. So you have to be very careful about this. If you do that continuously, you might become somebody who has insomnia. So you have to have a regular sleep schedule. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. Do not try to oversleep. Now, I can appreciate the fact that if you've been sleep deprived, you're trying to stay in bed a little longer, that might be okay. But on a routine basis, please do not try to get more than 8 hours. This could create a vicious cycle whereby you develop insomnia. And once you develop insomnia, it can be very difficult to reverse the process. So stick to regular sleep schedule.
Awesome. The next question is it okay to take sleep medications such as melatonin?
Melatonin is really not a sleep medication. I've been working on melatonin since, I don't know, maybe 22 years or so. In fact, my thesis was on melatonin. We wanted to demonstrate that if you were to give melatonin to folks with mild cognitive impairment, you can in fact slow down the aging process, maybe prevent Alzheimer's dementia. We were able to show folks who had level 2, level 3, we gained some level of memory, their mood improved, and the circadian profile improves. But melatonin is really not a sleep agent. Now, if you take melatonin 3, 4, 5 milligrams, you can in fact feel a little sleepy, but that's not its primary function. That's what we thought about 20 years ago, not anymore. What melatonin does is small amount, 0.5 milligram, maximum 1 milligram. What it does is it resynchronizes your circadian rhythm. It makes the clock synchronize a little bit better, which then does a much better job in terms of regulating the hormones of your body that are associated with sleep. So really melatonin is not a sleep hormone. It helps to resynchronize the clock, which in turn make it better, easier for you to get a good night's sleep.
Okay. The next question is, are wrist actigraphs more accurate than those that are worn on the head?
Now, I don't know exactly which ones are worn on the head, but I get the point. And I think I made that point. The actigraph has been validated. It has gone through a rigorous process. In fact, some of the work I did myself in San Diego, some of the wearables we're currently using now have not gone through a serious process, rigorous process of being validated the way we established for actigraphy. What you often get is the company says, yes, it's valid. Well, I want to see this being done in a laboratory that's independently funded. Most of those devices now, unfortunately, have not gone through this process. There are lots of devices that are designed to capture sleep at the forehead, different parts of the body. I can't speak to any one of them, but if this person wanted to ask me in a different context what I think about that, I certainly can. But I can tell you, polysomnography, what we do in the lab or at home, that's a gold standard. Actigraphy comes very close to polysomnography, even though they're looking at sleep in a different fashion. But the other devices, they're not as robust, therefore I don't strongly recommend them. Now, some of the wearables do a very good job in terms of giving you some indication how you're doing in terms of your sleep, but they're not exactly reliable. I'll be very careful about them if I were to make a decision about my own healthcare.
Okay, the next question is, why don't we remember our dreams, and is insomnia genetic?
Why don't we remember our dreams? Is it insomnia or genetics?
No, those are two separate questions. The first one is, why don't we remember our dreams? And the second one is insomnia genetic?
Oh, got it. Now, if you want to remember your dreams, I said earlier, based on the evidence from the laboratory, 4 to 5 times you all experience the dream episode. If before you get out of bed, you pause for a few minutes, you reach for a notepad and a pencil, you think about what happened during the night, you'll realize the dream mentation, the content of the dream will come back. Most of the time, the dreams we have are mundane activities you do on a daily basis. These are not emotionally that important. The only dream you tend to remember are those that have a strong emotional content to it, like a death of the family. You are going to remember that. Or you're thinking about somebody who was chasing you, having a nightmares. Those you're going to remember. But we all have the capacity to remember our dream. All we have to do is do not get out of bed and hope that somehow an hour later you're going to remember your dream. You can't. The minute you get out of bed, you begin to think about the daily activities, whatever mentations or dream content you may have had in your back of your head, they're going to go away. Every now and then, if something is really, really important, it might pop up 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not so busy. But otherwise, you all should be able to remember my dream if you follow this little recommendation I just gave you. Is insomnia genetics? There is one, fetal familial syndrome, but otherwise the other ones are not. At least we don't know. These are the ones we know about.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Jean-Louis. The next question is regarding the studies about light exposure. Is there a differential effect on light on health based if the light is artificial or natural?
Light of different types of sources, whether it comes directly from the sun or from night lamp, incandescent, fluorescent, it doesn't matter the source of light. It does have a direct bearing on the circadian clock, which in turn have some type of influence on melatonin, on cortisol, body temperature, and the like. If you said, I wanted to be exposed to sunlight, should I do early morning walks instead of a bright light at home? Absolutely, I'll say go natural. When you go out there early morning, facing east for about 30 minutes, I gotta tell you, your mood improved, your sleep improved, your ability to focus, your well-being, the whole quality of life, the way you look at the world changes. Could you do the same thing at home? Yes, you can. In which case, all you get is the light, but not the physical activity. So I highly recommend an early morning walk instead of a light box at home. But if you didn't have the choice, if it happens to be in a cold area in the wintertime, at least a light box at home can certainly be useful.
Thank you. Next question. We have many questions, Dr. Jean-Louis, which is great. But the next question is, if I want to track my sleep using a sleep pad that goes under my mattress, do you know any or do you recommend any?
If I recommended any, somebody would kill me. I'm not allowed to do that. There are plenty of them. What I would say is, before you choose any one of them, you may want to think about the data. Is there any scientific data that backs it up? Otherwise, I'd be very careful about purchasing an item that would tell you something about your sleep. Remember, this is such an important aspect of your life, both physical and psychological. So you have to take care of it the right way. Don't just buy a device because everybody's talking about it. Do your own homework. Find out, are there validation data that suggests this one is reliable and robust? If you can't look at those data, be very careful about that. Now, if you call me in a different context, we can talk about brands, but in a forum like this, I can't suggest any.
Awesome. This one's a long one, okay? So it says, I have narcolepsy, which is mild so far, but it still greatly affects me. I try to maintain sleep hygiene. I am aware of sugar and carbs being a slight trigger, and I've been prescribed Xyrem to help me sleep. I sleep great on Xyrem, but after a few days, I feel like I am derealizing. What are your recommendations in regards to derealization or other options to assist with symptoms of gaining a deeper sleep?
I'd love to be able to help with this, but again, I have to be very careful. I'm not anyone's clinician, so I have to be very careful what I say. So if this is a concern of yours, we can talk after this meeting, or certainly there are some clinicians here on campus at the sleep center that can actually guide you. I have to be very careful of what I say because I'm not really treating anybody with any type of sleep disorders. I'm providing global general recommendation in terms of how to improve health. But when we start getting into the specifics, I just cannot address that because I'm just not the person's clinician.
Awesome. So the next question says, when will your lab be established, our clinical lab?
Referring to the sleep lab, we are building right now. The word is that come September, we should be able to begin our research at the Circadian lab.
Okay. Somebody says, what are your thoughts and studies using compositional data analysis showing that replace sleep with moderate intensity physical activity lowers mortality risk?
That's very strong data. What we know is if you were to deprive yourself of sleep for a long period of time, you would surely die. In fact, the experiments have been done years ago looking at mice. If you deprive them of sleep completely, eventually they lose their fur, they stop eating, eventually they die. So I do not want anybody to think that somehow there's something else you could do to replace sleep. We haven't been able to determine this. Some research is being done, but you have to get a good night's sleep. If you hear anything today, find out the ideal sleep time for yourself. Whether it be 6 hours, 7, 8, 9 hours, find out what it is. Although I showed data that demonstrated 7 hours seems to be the sweet spot. By all means, do not deprive yourself of your sleep in pursuit of the American dream. We want people to achieve the American dream, but not to the detriment of your sleep, because if you're not sleeping enough, your risk of cardiovascular disease, brain injury is substantially higher.
Somebody asked, is CPAP the only treatment option you educated on, or did you also share information on oral appliance therapy, Inspire implants, etc.?
CPAP is the first item we think about in terms of treatment because it seems to be so effective. But there are cases where if somebody is not adhering, God bless, to CPAP treatment, you may want to go to the dental or oral appliances. You may also think about Inspire. Trouble with Inspire is it costs a lot of money. Not everybody is able to afford that. Here we're talking about health disparities, right? So if you have a community that cannot afford that, can you actually recommend people do that? No, but it is available. But ultimately, if I were to tell anybody what to do about sleep apnea, it's to lose weight. Remember that sleep apnea mechanically is the problem with having overweight or excess tissue in the upper airway. should you lose weight and the tissue, the pressure on the upper airway goes down, you no longer have difficulty breathing, you're not snoring, sleep apnea will go away. So even though we prescribe PAP therapy and others, but ultimately the best way to treat sleep apnea is to lose weight.
Awesome. Somebody asked, by the way, we're only going to do around 2 or 3 more questions. The rest we can answer through email. And somebody asked, since you have teams working in some countries in Africa, do you have plans to do some work on sleeping sickness?
We do have a few people working in Africa. We have some papers specifically from Ghana and Nigeria. If that person wants to talk to me about this in detail, I'd be happy to. So we had a training program, which I showed earlier. We trained about 60 scientists in Ghana and Nigeria to do this kind of work. So if that person wants me to connect with somebody who's doing sleep work in Africa, I'll be very happy to share. I'm sorry, I missed the second part.
If you were going to do any work on sleeping sickness in Africa.
I'm not, but I know people are thinking about that.
Awesome. Next question. Even if you're able to change your sleep habits to healthier ones, if your previous sleep behaviors were not great, is there a point that the damage becomes irreversible? For example, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I missed part of it. Could you please repeat?
Yeah. It says, even if you are able to change your sleep habits now to healthier ones, if the previous behaviors were not great, is there a point that the damage becomes irreversible?
I'm not sure about what behavior, but what I can tell you is the minute you begin to realize sleep is important, that's the time your life begins to change. You don't want to go back and think about, I used to do bad things when I was a teenager. I'll go to bed whenever I want, I wake up whenever that's already done. What you want to be thinking about now is, I'm 40 years old, not me, much older. What do I do now? Have a regular sleep schedule. If you're going to go to bed at 10 o'clock every night, keep to that schedule. You're going to wake up at 5, 6 in the morning, stay to that schedule. Sleep irregularity is directly connected to metabolic dysfunction. So whatever you want, you learn in terms of the good sleep tips on how to change your habit for healthy sleep, practice them, be consistent as much as possible. Don't worry so much about having it in the past. It's already happened. Let's go forward now and think about, let me just take care of the things I have to take care of, such that when it's time for me to sleep, all I'm doing is sleeping.
Great, thank you. So if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to email us. We are going to share the recording of today's presentation as well. We will share our contact information where you can email us with questions. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you, guys. It's been great.